I find myself in a bit of a transition period right now. I feel like I'm leaving behind a lot of things and I'm moving into a lot of new and exciting things. As I'm going through this transition, one of the things that I'm doing is I am reflecting and taking an inventory on how things have changed over the last couple of years, especially as I've been working for myself and doing a lot of this interpersonal and healing work. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed that's changed in the last couple of years is my level of anxiety and how much anxiety I have reduced and eliminated from my life. And it's just made such a profound and tremendous impact on my life and the quality of my life on a day-to-day basis. And so I wanted to put together a video to share a little bit about my experience and my journey with anxiety, as well as sharing some strategies, some tips, some practices that I think might be really useful for you if you struggle with anxiety and are looking to get rid of it. If you haven't been here before, my name's Hayden. On this channel, I make videos all about how to become the best version of yourself and how to truly create your own life. So if you find value in this video, would highly encourage you to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, stay notified when I post future content. But let's jump in. In thinking about anxiety, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it or potentially define it. But for me, when I think about being anxious, I think about it as being non-present and focused on something troubling. So for me, anxiety shows up most when I am not present to what's currently happening and my brain is somewhere else focused on something troubling. The bill that I have to pay next month, or the conversation that I'm gonna have to have with that person next week or tomorrow. When I'm anxious, I notice not only is it a mental experience where I'm ruminating, circling a particular thought over and over and over and over, but I have this general low-level sense of panic throughout my whole body. And I can feel it very physically. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my stomach. It's this tightness all throughout my body, like I'm tensing, getting ready for something. And the more that I've paid attention to it, the more that I have thought about and reflected on and become more aware of my anxiety and what's caused it, I realize that that's a pretty good way to look at it. It's like I'm tensing for something that hasn't yet happened. And that tensing for something that hasn't happened yet really for me started when I was a kid. In my family, my role in the family, the role that I took on was that of people pleaser, harmony bringer. The way that I fit into my family was constantly thinking about the dynamics, the energy that everybody else was bringing, and how I could change myself in order to hopefully bring harmony to the situation, but at the very least, just not cause any additional chaos or issues. And so when I was younger, that became sort of my MO or strategy for navigating life, was thinking, I'm going to pay attention to what everybody else is doing. I'm going to pay attention to the external, and then I'm going to change myself in order to meet or match that external. So it became this hypervigilance for me, this hypervigilance in thinking about, what is this person thinking? What's the dynamic or the energy of this group? What is this scenario going to be? How's it going to play out? It was this constant analysis of what was happening externally, the circumstances and the people, and then thinking about how can I best censor myself, change myself, shift myself. How can I best show up in order to match what's happening externally and not create any more issues? And that's a lot to think about. It's like kind of overwhelming to be thinking all the time, how do I need to be showing up in order to meet this circumstance or this experience? And it got really bad in college and after college. The amount of anxiety that I had. I never had a panic attack, but I know that I was very close to having panic attacks on multiple occasions. I can remember very vividly being so overwhelmed and being so anxious that I thought I was literally just gonna lose it. You know, the other thing too about anxiety is when you're so focused on this future scenario, this thing that hasn't happened yet, this thing that you're trying to solve in your brain that's not even currently happening, it's super easy to lose sight of yourself. You're so focused on the future, you're so focused on fixing something in the future that you're not in touch with the present moment. You're not in touch with who you currently are. And so in a way, I feel like I almost lost myself to my anxiety. My life became about trying to control and plan everything so perfectly so that I wouldn't be anxious, instead of just doing the thing that I wanted to do, like living my life the way that I wanted to live it. And so it wasn't really until after I graduated, when I moved to California and I started seeing a therapist, that I really started to understand and become aware of how much my anxiety was driving my life. And now over the last, 4 years, 5 years, that has been a huge focus for me, is getting clear on where this anxiety was coming from, has come from, and doing what's necessary to reduce it and eliminate it. Because what I can say confidently is that my life is so much better on the other side of not being constantly anxious, because there's a level of freedom outside of anxiety. There's a level of like liberation outside of anxiety. Because with anxiety, again, you're constantly focused on, how am I going to fix this thing? How am I going to plan for this thing? And you're not living. You're not present. You're missing out on the vibrancy and the joy and the depth of this present moment. And that's what I feel like I've been cultivated in reducing this anxiety. Is I have so much more appreciation for what's going on now. I have so much more appreciation for the relationships in my life. I have so much more appreciation for creating, the creative process, for sharing myself authentically, for sharing myself intimately. I don't think that me fully expressing myself creatively would have been possible with the level of anxiety that I had. So I feel really grateful for the work that I've done and the amount of anxiety that I've eliminated from my life. And I want to share some of the things that have really worked for me with you, in the hopes that they will hopefully turn on some light bulbs, or affirm what you are currently doing, or give you some new ideas, some things to try if you find yourself currently struggling with a high level of anxiety. So I've got 5 things that I want to share. They range from easy and implementable immediately, things that you can take on now, all the way to things that will require a higher degree of investment, potentially financial, but mostly of time and energy. The first one is getting grounded into your body. And what I mean by this is taking action to drop out of your head, which I find is where a lot of anxiety exists, down into your body. So actually getting present to and physically grounded into your body. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, but I think some of the most powerful are breath work. I'm gonna totally butcher the exact name of this exercise or framework, but there's a thing called box breathing. I'll stick a link to an example down in the description of this video. The idea is you are taking a certain amount of time for each step of breathing. So breathing in, holding it, breathing out, and holding it at the bottom. And I find this really helpful because you're basically engaging your conscious attention and presence in a very physical activity, breathing. I find after I do that, I tend to settle down a lot. I calm down a lot. The other thing that you could do, which I think is also really helpful for falling asleep, is a body scan. So taking your attention and basically scanning all the way from the top of your body all the way down through the bottom, going super slow and trying to hold your attention as long as possible on each different part of your body. And the idea is to bring that conscious awareness, that presence to your physical body instead of your head, which is where all the future problems exist and all the anxiety exists. Number 2 is to get more, better quality sleep. Part of the reason that anxiety persists is because we're so used to flashing forward into the future to try and plan for and solve a future problem versus staying present. And so the game with your anxiety over time is going to be practicing presence. It's going to be practicing becoming more present, having that be the go-to place versus the future-based trying to fix or solve a problem. And in building that skill, building that muscle of not having the tendency to flash forward, but remaining firmly rooted in the present, the better care that you've taken of your body, the more energy you're gonna have to be able to practice that and stay present. Because think about the last time when you were super stressed out and overbooked and overwhelmed and running around like a crazy person. Likely you weren't thinking about practicing a new skill like being present. You were going back to behaviors that you'd been practicing for a long time. I find a good way to think about this is almost like you get tunnel vision and you sit back on behaviors that have worked for you previously instead of leaning forward into something new. And so when you're thinking about reducing the level of anxiety that you have, getting better quality sleep is incredibly important because sleep is one of the foundational aspects of your energy. It's one of the best ways to feel better. It's one of the best ways to have more energy. It's one of the best ways to take care of yourself. And so if you're getting better quality sleep more of the time, you're going to be in a position to be able to more effectively practice these kinds of presence practices, these kinds of things where you are interrupting the old behavior or the old pattern that kept you anxious and practicing something new. The third thing is to take what I would call an anxiety inventory. But the idea is that there are likely things that you're doing right now in your life that you're not even aware of that are contributing to your anxiety. So the idea with an anxiety inventory is to sit down and literally map out, look at all of the different things that you do during the day, who you text, the information that you look at on the internet, what your schedule looks like, who you go out and see during the day. Literally map out all of those different things and look at what are the activities that tend to lead to the highest amount of anxiety for you. And once you're aware of those things, you can start to ask yourself, how can I shift or change or eliminate this thing so that it doesn't continue to add to my overall anxiety? For example, I had a friend who shared with me that they were really anxious about the news. And I asked them what their news consumption looked like. And they told me that when they go to do a search online, their homepage is Yahoo, which has all of the major headlines and stories of the day right there front and center. So the majority of the days when they were gonna go do something else, they would get sucked into reading about politics and the current state of the pandemic and all that sort of stuff. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being an informed citizen. I think that's really important, but it's also important to understand when you're overdoing it. So for example, that would be a really small thing that they could change that would eliminate a lot of anxiety. Because you could set aside time to say, hey, I'm gonna go do some research right now to understand what's going on. But the majority of the time when you go online, you're not getting sucked into this black hole, rabbit hole of anxiety. Another example, personally, I used to have a lot of anxiety around money and not knowing where my money was, not knowing if I was gonna have enough to do X, Y, or Z, what have you. And I realized a big part of that is because I didn't really have a budget. I knew in a broad sense what I needed and where my money was going, but I didn't know specifically. I didn't know exactly. And so I had a lot of money anxiety. And now I've implemented a really strict budget and a really strict financial process. So I'm very clear on where all of my money is going, when I'm gonna have enough, when I'm not gonna have enough, and I can actually do something about it. I noticed that money was causing me anxiety, and I asked myself, what can I do so that it doesn't create as much anxiety? And then actually took action to make it happen. Fourth strategy is to meditate. I want to share potentially a different perspective than you've heard about meditation. I was on and off with meditation for a long time and didn't really have a strict practice or routine with it. Now I do. I meditate every morning. I've meditated every morning for probably the last 4 to 6 months. And it's made an enormous difference in my anxiety. Because when I think about meditation, really one of the concepts or one of the core ideas behind meditation is that, in a sense, you are practicing presence. You're sitting down and you are practicing getting into relationship with the present moment. Not your thoughts, not your stories, not your emotions necessarily. You're practicing getting in touch with the present moment. And what typically happens during a meditation session is you'll start and then your brain will come in, a thought will come in, and it'll want to lead you in a certain direction. It'll want to lead you into the future. Anxiety. And part of the practice, big practice in meditation, is letting that go and then returning to the present moment. So you get caught up in your brain and then you return to the present moment. Get caught up in your brain, return to the present moment. It's developing this muscle of being able to do that every time that it happens. Every time that you get caught up in a brain story, you get brought back to the present moment. And so you think about the power of, if you're doing that intentionally for even 10 to 15 minutes a day, it just means that when you're then out in the world, when you're at work, when you're talking with your partner, when you're doing whatever, you've already practiced that. You've been practicing that process of getting caught up in the brain story and then coming back to the present moment. And it just means that you're going to be able to do that more effectively at work. It means you're going to be able to do that more effectively when you're in a conversation with your partner about money and you feel yourself getting anxious. You can catch yourself getting caught in the brain story and then practice coming back to the present moment. So I think that's part of why I think meditation is just such a powerful tool for anxiety. The fifth and final thing is to go to therapy. Therapy is one of the best investments that you can make with your money for a whole multitude of reasons outside of just anxiety, becoming a more well-rounded person, healing your traumas, living a more fulfilling life, getting back to personal power, all those different types of things. But I think specifically with anxiety, it can be incredibly powerful because one of the things that I think keeps anxiety in place is we often don't have any sort of sounding board or outside perspective on our anxious stories. So we'll be telling ourselves a story that's creating a lot of anxiety about how we aren't going to be able to afford X, Y, or Z next month, or how we're not going to get that promotion, or how this person doesn't like us, what have you. We'll create these anxious stories and there's no outside perspective. It's like this echo chamber over and over and over and over and over, and it gets louder and louder and louder. One of the great things about therapy is when you create a trusting relationship with a therapist, you start to be able to share those stories out loud and get outside perspective. You actually get somebody who is supporting you in seeing how that's actually not the case. That's not true. That's not likely to happen. Therapy is also really valuable because it can help you to normalize things that might be making you anxious. So for example, one of the flavors of anxiety stories that I pick up sometimes is that because of what I'm feeling or because of what I'm experiencing, that means that I'm weird or broken. Like nobody else has experienced this before. I must be the only person that feels this way. And so therefore that means something about me. In connecting with a therapist and sharing with a therapist, it also helps to normalize those stories. Because once you hear, oh, a lot of people go through this and a lot of people feel this way, I think it helps you reduce a lot of the anxiety that you have. So those are the 5 things: getting grounded into your body, getting better quality, more sleep, more of the time, taking an anxiety inventory, meditation, and therapy. All of those things have been incredibly valuable for me, like really helping me move from this very tense, locked up, constantly hyper vigilant state of being that I was in all the time to a much calmer, much more relaxed, much more grounded, much more present version that I am now. So I'd love to hear in the comments, have you tried any of those before? Have they worked for you? If you're struggling with anxiety or if you've overcome anxiety, what else has worked for you? We'd love to hear your experience. We'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And until next time.